Folks, as we're gathering today, I just want to say how pleased we are to have you here. And people are still coming, so we're going to take a few moments. But I want to offer something that our church has. These are personal hearing assist devices. And I know many people that tell me, Pastor Walter, we can't hear what you're saying. But then once they put this in their ear and turn it on, it's like a little radio. And Jean is wearing one right here, so she can testify how good it is. I just want to offer these to you, okay? So I'm just going to put them here on a chair. So if even during the presentation you want to get one, please do. All you do is insert the thing in the ear and then turn it on. And you're able to adjust the volume yourself for it. So I don't know if anyone would, are you interested in trying? Okay. Al? Anyone else? I'll just set them right there on a chair here. Well, folks, I'm very happy to begin today with you. And on this rainy day in August, it's good to come together to talk about the work of our church and our community for the good of the people of our neighborhood and of our congregations. There's a lot of people here from different organizations and from Peace Church, and we're very happy to have you here. I want you to know that today we welcome some folks from the Florida Weekly with us. Chelly, you're back there in the pretty coral sweater. And also Vandy is a photographer that's here, and she'll be taking some pictures during our presentation. They're doing a series on loneliness and have been working with Dr. Felke. And so they wanted to come today to hear what we're saying today. You should also know that because many of our people are not here in Florida today, we're also live streaming this across the nation to people in our congregations who are listening. Welcome today to be with you wherever you are in God's world. And because of that, today when we do ask questions, I'm going to ask you to use the mic and I'll give it to you so that to make sure that the people on live stream can also hear us. Well, Dr. Felke, we're so thankful to be able to be with you today. We've been your friend for a couple of years and ask you to help us to understand the challenges that we face here because of our unique demographic of being located in a place with many seniors. That's our observation, but we wanted someone like you, a social scientist, to help us to understand who these wonderful people are and how we can serve them more effectively. So we welcome Dr. Felke from Florida Gulf Coast University. Dr. Felke.
Great. Okay. Looks like I am. So thank you very much. It is a pleasure to be here with you today to talk about the results of the study that we've been conducting for a few months now. Some of you may have been here during the initial presentation that I had come out with my research assistant and given. And this is really going to be just more of an in-depth follow-up to that presentation that will involve some demographic data. It will involve a little bit of a spatial analysis. And it'll also involve some qualitative data, some data that was given to us through a few focus groups that we were able to host here at Peace Lutheran Church. And what I will say is, in my estimation, from having done this type of work for several years now, my background in this area is that I'm not a gerontologist. That is not my actual training. I don't specifically look at issues with older adults. But since I've arrived here in Southwest Florida, that's really become one of the major parts of my research agenda, and that first occurred down in Collier County, where we conducted a similar study to this that eventually led to the establishment of the first ever senior center in Collier County, which is now known as the Naples Senior Center and is operated by Jewish Family and Community Services. Secondarily to that center was a center opened by Collier Senior Resources called the Golden Gate Senior Center. And what I can tell you is that your geographic area here, your community in a 5-mile radius around this campus, is the exact type of location where a senior center should exist. And I can tell you that right from the start, and I'll explain to you exactly how I've kind of come to that, that finding through looking at the data. So, taking a look at some of our demographics in Lee County overall, just to kind of give you a contextual understanding of what we're looking at. When I talk about older adults, and that's the way I talk about them, I always try to say older adults. Other people will say seniors, other people will say, oh, the elderly, and I don't do that. I always try to bring it back to older adults because individuals have different mindsets about what those definitions mean. And when I talk about older adults, I'm talking about individuals age 60 and over, and some individuals would even challenge me on that definition. The reason we use that definition is because that is what the Census Bureau uses. So when we're looking at data, that's generally the base point of data for the older adult population. In some cases, we actually can only get data at 65 and over. So you may see in some areas, I'll be talking about 60, in some areas at 65, and that's just because of the way the data is collected. But as you can see, when we look at the number of individuals age 60 and over, we have almost 240,000. Right? And remember, this is an estimate for all of Lee County. And that is your full-time resident count. That does not include individuals that come here seasonally. And a lot of times when I do this work, people say, well, you really want the full-time people. You're not worried about those seasonal people because they can come here and they have someplace else to go to, so they don't need something like a senior access center. Let me tell you, that's what I thought too. I was wrong about that. Absolutely wrong about that. And what I'm going to actually tell you in the findings from the focus group here is just how important those seasonal residents are to your community and to your older adult population in this community. When we look at the individuals age 65 and over, that makes up the largest segment of this population currently. And I say currently because data is always as good as the time in which it's presented. But think about the fact that in a few years, that segment, which is right now the largest population, is going to age. And we have seen, and we'll see on some population projections here, that it's actually that population where we start getting into 75 and over that is going to become the largest segment of our population here in Lee County and in Southwest Florida overall. When we look at the number of households with an adult age 60 and over, we're just over 145,000. The median age of that population is 71.2, so it is a little bit higher. So even though we're talking about individuals 60 and over, that population actually average age is about 71.2. And then the other one here is the old age dependency ratio. And a lot of people don't report this, but I think it's critically important for our community to understand this. Our old age dependency ratio is 49.3. What that means is that the number of those aged above 65 years as a share of those between the age 15 to 64. So this number tells us how many retired people a potential worker has to sustain. So think about it. We're almost at a 50-to-1 ratio. So for every one, how the Census Bureau defines it, able-bodied working individual, they have to support 50 retired individuals. That's what that number tells us. So that has big implications. Because if we know that that dependency ratio is there and it's that significant, then we know that we have need among this population in our communities. So that is an important number that I think we don't often report that is actually really critically important for us to understand. A little bit more just about the demographics, what our community looks like with older adults. It's about an even split between males and females, with females being a little bit higher percentage of the population. It is a rather homogeneous community in terms of racial identity, and it is a small amount of ancestry or ethnic identity in terms of Hispanic Latino. I get challenged on this. Well, why are you bringing this into it? Well, this is important for your programming, because if you know that you have individuals who speak a different language or have other types of cultural identity, then you might want to plan your programming accordingly around those numbers. I can tell you in Naples, the Naples Senior Center has a very different population of participants than does the Golden Gate Senior Center. The Golden Gate Senior Center has a very high population, for example, of individuals who identify as Hispanic Latino and who also have Spanish as their primary language. So a lot of their programming, as a result, tends to have tendencies toward Spanish language. When we look at the number of veterans, our population here in Lee County, it's about 18.4%. Good news, not a lot of older adults having to care for their grandchildren. So that's a good thing, because we don't have that additional burden necessarily on individuals who are really kind of looking at, their retirement years and having done their work as parents. The number of individuals who have moved in the past year, it's about 10.3%. So that's not a bad bit of geographic mobility. So we do have some percentage of our population age 60 and over who is moving around. And we have a decently educated population. About 31.2% of the 60 and over population hold a bachelor's degree or higher. Now, these numbers may seem all kind of, well, yeah, that's great, but I'm going to show you exactly where these come in when we start talking about some of that qualitative data through the focus groups that we held. So, as I said, I like to do things spatially. I'm a big fan of being able to actually see where the action is. Where are the actual people in our communities? So when I do my mapping, this is how it looks, and you can see that there are two circles kind of on this map. The smaller circle is a 1 mile buffer. So anything within that smaller circle is 1 mile from where you are sitting right now. The larger circle that you see is a 5 mile area. Right? Now, when we do things, a lot of the work that I do, I tend to do along with one of my research colleagues who is in the area of public affairs. So we do a lot on urban planning and city infrastructure. And when we look at her work in terms of infrastructure, we don't like people to have to walk beyond 1 mile. We basically go by, you shouldn't have to walk more than a half mile for something that you want and more than a mile for something that you need. Anything beyond that tends to be geographic. Now, again, that's walking distance. But that distance becomes important because as we start to look at some of your options locally here, that distance actually does become a significant piece to consider. So in your 5 mile catchment area, there are 57,108 individuals age 60 or over. So that's just within 5 miles of here. So if you take a look at that buffer, that big circle buffer, you can see that right outside of it, you actually have even higher pockets right outside of the buffer. So we're talking about almost 57,000 people just within 5 miles. For comparison, let's go back to that 2012 study I did in Naples. The Naples Senior Center when I did their study, we looked at about 26 census tracts along what I would call Naples proper, right? Thinking about the Gulf, right before you go off into Marco Island, right at the Bonita Beach, the Bonita Springs line, and then out to Collier Boulevard. Their numbers were not anywhere close to what your number is here, just in a 5-mile area. And when they asked me, Tom, how many seniors you think are going to show up here and use the center? I said, I don't know, maybe like 300, 350. They're currently at 1,100. And they're drawing from Marco, they're drawing from Bonita, they're drawing from Estero. You have the type of population concentration right in your backyard that they had in the entirety of their study. So a much larger geography in that study than we used for this, because if we used it here, it would be overwhelming. You would have probably much closer to about 80,000 individuals just in your area if we used the same size geography. So, as I said, where this becomes even more important is we're always working off of estimates, right? Data is only as good as literally the minute that I put it up on these slides. So if we look at the population projections that are coming out by age through 2040, we can see that these projections are going to grow rather significantly. So if we're looking right now at kind of the 2020 numbers, look at the age bracket 75 plus for 2020, where we're at about 87,000, and at 2040 we're at almost 169,000. So we are going to see an explosion in that population group within 20 years. It's just massive. What's driving that? More and more people are coming to this area, and our areas continue to develop. We continue to build more and more housing. So we just have people that are still flocking to the state of Florida for their retirement years. Now, as I said, I always take a look at language in terms of your programming, and I think in your area, again, the reason I wanted to bring this up is because you have a significant pocket right on the outskirts of the 1 mile marker. You have that little targeted area there. Overall, you have about 737 Spanish-speaking individuals within that 5-mile catchment area who say that they speak English less than, as they would term it, very well. And again, these are individuals 65 and over. So again, in looking at your programming, this may be something that you would want to consider in some programming. Now, let's take a look at some socioeconomics. You have 11.2% of male individuals and 30.8% of female individuals who are 65 and over who are widowed in Lee County. And this becomes significant, again, because as we are looking at why do we do a senior center? Right? And there are a lot of communities, I'll tell you, there's a lot of communities right now that are looking to develop senior centers. All of a sudden it's the thing and people are starting to pay attention, but the problem is I've been part of ones that work really well, and I'm part of ones that don't work so well. And it's because they don't have that question answered. Why are we doing this? And a lot of people are doing it for the wrong reasons. They're doing it because, I'll be honest, they look at it and they say, well, this is a way for us to bring a revenue stream into our building or into our agency, and that shouldn't be the way that you're doing it. The way that it should be done is responding to the needs of the community, and that's why I go out and I do work like this. And what we found, for example, with the Naples Senior Center largely had to do with the two circles at the top and the one in the bottom left-hand corner, which are the number of households with an adult age 65 or over living alone. The fact of the matter is the main reason for a senior center, when we did the one down in Naples, and I went out and I was talking to people, the first people I talked to were the social workers. They're my people. I figure these are going to be people that are going to understand this. They're going to know what older adults are facing. Thank God we didn't listen to them. Because if we did, the only thing we would have focused on was public transportation, because that was the thing they told us was the problem. It's public transportation. Older adults don't have a way to get around. Now, I'm not saying it's not an issue, but then we actually sat with older adults in focus groups and we talked to them and we said, well, what about this public transportation? And they said, you couldn't pay me to get on a bus. I love my car. I love having that independence. I drive myself everywhere I go. Now, that wasn't the case for everyone, but for the majority it was. What was the biggest singular factor that came out? Something that we didn't even have on our radar? Social isolation, loneliness. When we started talking to people in these focus groups, they said, I don't have anywhere to go to be around my people. I don't have anyone to sit with who understands what it was like growing up the way I grew up. Yeah, my kids visit, my grandkids come, and it's great to see them. But on a daily basis, I don't just have a place to go and sit and talk. And I can tell you from evaluations that I've done of the senior centers down in Collier County since that time, that's still the biggest thing that we hear. When people turn around and they say to us, what do you love the most about this center? Oh, there's always somebody here to talk to. The people here are so nice. They're so caring. Not unlike what we heard when we did the focus groups here. So it's important to understand that when we're looking at some of these things, we have a large population of individuals who are living alone or who are widowed. So again, could be very big things for our programming, and I'll come back and I'll talk a little bit about especially the widowed piece. So as I was talking about with your living alone, we mapped this out. So it's estimated that you have just over 11,000 households, not people, households, that have an individual age 60 or 5 or over who is living alone, or 60 or over in this case, who's living alone. And again, you can see all of that orange, all of that red, those are your highest segments of those individuals. And they are within, again, that 5-mile catchment area of your location here. So looking a little bit more at socioeconomics, looking at disability, about 26% of individuals 60 or over live with a disability in Lee County. About 21.2% are still engaged in the labor force. So it's not that we have a completely retired population in Lee County. A lot of our older adults are still working in the labor force. We have a relatively low percentage of individuals 60 or over who are living below the federal poverty line. But always make sure that when I'm talking about percentages, you're looking underneath, because I always provide the numbers in addition to the percentages. Go ahead, you have a question? Sure. Nope, these statistics, so great question. So these statistics all come from the Census Bureau out of a data set called the American Community Survey. So basically what it is they do the 10-year annual, decennial census, and then what they do is they produce estimates every single year, and then they aggregate those for a 5-year period in order to make them reliable and consistent. So this is the data that we're using. So that's where this comes from. Yes, and it's really because you would be telling the Census Bureau that that's who you are. Right, so, and it's kind of like how they do Nielsen households, right? Some houses have that little box on their TV and other people don't. Similar thing. They do estimates with certain pockets of the community that produce the more consistent results for the surveys. Right, so those individuals would be counted back wherever their primary residence is. So, and again, it's all based off of an estimate, right? It would be near impossible to try to get to these figures if we actually, as you said, had to go around calling people and trying to get them that way. I've tried that, it doesn't work. Yeah. So we have a relatively low percentage there, but as I was saying, always take a look at the numbers underneath. 8.5% sounds like a low percentage, but we're actually talking about 20,000 individuals in this regard. right? So always make sure that you're keeping the numbers. That's why I give both numbers. And then about 3.5% of households with an adult age 60 or over receive SNAP. For those of you who are not familiar with SNAP, SNAP is Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, formerly known as food stamps. Right? So that's the program. And I can tell you that that's the number that I always take with a grain of salt, because research shows that individuals age 60 and over are the least likely group to avail themselves of that benefit, even though they're eligible for it, just because of the different generational mindset that they have around some of these government programs. So taking a look at disability status for age 65 and over in Lee County, the Census Bureau breaks this out in these different areas. So you can see that 28.6% of the population identify as having a disability, and then they break it down into kind of these 5 categories. The largest being ambulatory, so being able to actually walk and move, with the second highest being a hearing disability. The ambulatory disability, again, this is an important figure, because that also can lead back into some of your programming. Any of these could. You could have somebody maybe coming into a senior center to look at doing hearing tests. But the ambulatory one has probably become one of the largest ones, because there is so much going on now in regards to fall prevention. So there's a lot being done in terms of balance programs for older adults, and teaching them how to strengthen certain core muscles in their hips and their stomach in order to keep them more balanced and more stable. Now, poverty guidelines. So we always take a look at poverty, and I like to give you this slide just so that you can kind of understand what poverty looks like and how the United States defines it. I think this is a horrible way to define poverty. I won't totally go into my soapbox on that, other than to say that the way that we calculate poverty in the United States now is the same way that we've done it since the 1950s, with very slight adjustments to the calculation, which originally was produced by taking the cost of food and multiplying it by 3 and saying that's the poverty line for a family of 4, right? So that is how we calculate poverty. So it doesn't matter where you live in the United States. It doesn't matter that it costs more to live in certain areas than others. Poverty is poverty according to the line. And even that isn't true, because there's actually 2 lines. One determines if you're eligible for a program. One determines whether or not you're counted as living in poverty. So technically you could be in poverty in one line and not in poverty in the other. Doesn't make a lot of sense. But anyway, these are the 2019 poverty guidelines. So for one person, if your household annual income is $12,490 or lower, you are considered to be in poverty. And then you can see that the numbers go up. I generally don't get past that second number, because most of our older adult population generally do not have more than 2 people in the family. So we largely are looking at those first 2 numbers, that 12,490 and that 16,910. Now, when you think about income required to meet basic needs, and this is for age 65 and over, again, this is for Lee County based on some of our rent figures and mortgage figures in this area, you can see that for an individual, a single individual, age 65 plus, who is a homeowner without a mortgage, the income required to meet their basic needs is $19,056. That's over the poverty line by about $7,000. Right? So we have to make sure that our seniors, our older adults, are falling in that area. Now again, that is factoring in that you have excellent health. If you are in poor health, that number goes up to about $22,656. And again, this is a homeowner without a mortgage. And then you can see that we have, some of the other pieces in there. If you're a homeowner with a mortgage, that goes up by almost $11,000 to $33,000 a year. Now, when you look at your community here, you have about 4,338 individuals age 60 or over who are living below the federal poverty line, again, within that 5-mile area of where we're sitting right now. And again, you have a very large pocket right off of where we're talking about here, right off of Pine Ridge Road. Right? So again, you have a rather large pocket of individuals very close to your area here, and then we have an even higher pocket just a little bit above that. And then again, look to the top left-hand corner. You have another very large pocket just outside of that 5-mile area. So if we were to expand this, say, to a 10-mile area, that number, again, would probably go up by, I would say, roughly 1,500 to 2,000 people. When we look at utilization of SNAP benefits, there's about, and the number was funny, 1, 2, 3, 4. So 1,234 SNAP households that have an individual age 60 or over. So those are households that are receiving SNAP benefits. And again, right within that pocket is right there to that same area of Pine Ridge Road. So what we can tell by this, if we were to overlay all these maps, is that that little tract, that census tract there, that is your target tract for a lot of your social issues. Right? Because that tract pops up over and over and over as we look at these maps. Yes? I'd have to go out and actually look at it, but I'll be honest, I am not fully familiar with the Lee County area up here. What I can tell you, and it's a little misleading because obviously on the map everything is much more compressed than it would be in real life. But what you're talking about, and it's a little hard to see, but you're talking about that area, Pine Ridge Road, and then it kind of has Summerlin swinging underneath, and then 6 Mile Cypress is right over the top. Right? So if anybody knows the community, you probably have a better sense of what that looks like in your own minds than I would be able to describe. Now, when we look at cost data, this comes from the Center for Neighborhood Technology. They are constantly monitoring communities across the country to take a look at what costs look like in this area. Average housing costs in Lee County match the national average. Right? That's not good. This is one of those areas where we'd like to be below the national average. Right? We don't want our costs to be as high as the national. Average monthly housing costs for Lee County are estimated at about $1,309 monthly. Right? So when you're thinking about that over the course of the year, if you are at that average just for your housing costs and you're a single homeowner age 60 or over, you're going to hit the poverty line figure of $12,000 quite easily just through your housing costs, not adding on anything else that we know we need. Housing burdened when 30% of your household income goes to your housing costs only. In Southwest Florida, I can tell you every single community is housing burdened. It doesn't matter if you're in Punta Gorda or Port Charlotte or Fort Myers or Bonita or Estero or Naples. They're all over 30%. Now, when you combine, if you look at the average housing costs for Lee County, it's at about 32%. Now track in your transportation costs. Because we know, as I said at the beginning, public transportation can be a problem. And the other situation is you need to be able to drive a lot of the areas here. Right? A lot of these communities weren't planned out in a grid-style format like we have in New York or Boston or Philadelphia. So driving transportation becomes important. Well, the average cost of transportation is about 26%. So taken together, you're looking at 58% of your household income going just to those two factors, meaning almost 40% of your household income needs to be reserved for anything else that you have outside of those two. The other thing is the Center for Neighborhood Technology looks at location-efficient neighborhoods. How efficient is it for you to be able to get around your community? Lee County is designated as a 0% location-efficient neighborhood. Don't feel bad. So does Collier County, so does Glades, so does Hendry. Right? They're all location inefficient. We don't have great sidewalks. We don't have great, as I said, grid layout structures with our roads. Right? So all of those things take a toll on our community. The housing burden profile for older adults in Lee County, there's about 101, almost 102,000 households with a householder aged 65 or over that have a cost burden over that 30%. So as I said, this cost data, hits our older adult population very hard, because a lot of these individuals, because they are out of the labor force, they don't have routine income, they're probably on Social Security, or maybe they're on a pension. And we've seen where some of the government rules that have come down have limited some of our cost of living adjustments. When you look at our housing costs by average median income, you can see that where your average median income is at about 50 to 80%, we start to see very high numbers of cost burden. So again, we have individuals that are not making a lot in terms of their average median income, but that is not keeping pace with their housing costs. The housing costs are rising while their average median income is staying stagnant. And again, part of that is because of some of the things we've seen in there not being cost of living adjustments in some of our programs. Same thing for renters. We can see that once we get to that 30.1 to 50% column, and we look down and we start getting into the 1397, the 1006, even going over one to the 1136, which is right on the cusp of that 30%. Income is not keeping pace with housing costs. So let's take a look at your public transit. I took the Lee County maps and I did a little Lee Tran assessment. You basically have two major public transportation routes within 5 miles of this location. Right? Now, when we look at that in terms of stops, because that makes more sense, there are about 7 sets of stops. Right? So 14 stops total within a 1 mile catchment area. Now, the problem is they're not here, right? So remember I talked about that whole half mile, 1 mile? Here we are. The problem that you have is your stops are about a mile from here. So an individual that was going to take public transportation would have to walk a mile from the current bus stops to this location. Now, that's actually pretty good, believe it or not. When we did this in Naples, they had nothing near there. They actually had to engage CAT, Collier Area Transit, to talk about deviating the current public transportation in order to bring it closer to their facility. Now, the good news was they were actually successful in that endeavor, and they were able to do that. But that gives you some idea of why that half mile, 1 mile piece, does actually become an important consideration. Community resources. I tried to map out your community a little bit to see what you have around here. This is pretty easy. You don't have much. You really don't. And the map is a little bit difficult to see in this kind of setting, so I kind of broke it out this way a little bit. The one thing you have is you have several religious congregations in your area. You actually have more religious congregations than you do almost anything else within the 5 mile catchment area that we took a look at. All right. When we look at some specific pieces, I tried to put some things on here that might stand out because on one hand, they might help with some of your future programming, but on the other case, they really kind of go back to the older adult population. So you have Arden Courts, which is a memory care community. That's the closest thing you have to here. It's about, just under a quarter mile away. You have a Goodwill bookstore just over a mile away, the Gladiolus Food Pantry, which I drove by on my way here, and it was packed. It was packed. There were people lined up out front of that place this morning. The Heights Foundation. Now, why do I bring the Heights? The Heights Foundation works with children, right? Oh, but they possibly are going to build a free medical clinic. Right? Now, we don't know where that stands, but I throw it in here. just because could be a possible partner. Park Royal Hospital, which primarily focuses on mental health, and they do have a senior inpatient treatment program, is about 3.5 miles away. Hope Healthcare is about 3.6 miles away. Most people know Hope Healthcare as Hope Hospice, right? They've rebranded themselves. They're now Hope Healthcare because they are offering much more in terms of programming than hospice care. And probably one of the programs that they're pushing the most is the Hope PACE program. And the PACE program is actually designed for independent at-home living, right, especially toward end-of-life care. But they're also going to plan a bereavement program for individuals who lose a pet. Ooh, might be a programming option. I threw in the Waxahachie Recreation Center, which is about 4.2 miles away. And the reason I put this in here is to show you that when we start looking at public recreation centers, that's your closest one. Next beyond that is your Carl Drews Community Center, which is about 12.1 miles away. And the only thing that we can identify as a senior center is the Lehigh Acres Senior Center, which is 22.2 miles away from here. You do. So you do have some public transportation that runs out that way. My purpose was more to kind of take a look at, I always engage with county members, and county always says, oh, we have programs for older adults. And I say, oh, fantastic. Where are they? And they say, oh, well, we have them here. And I said, well, they offered on a routine basis? Well, no. Okay. Well, do you have a senior center? Oh, yes, we have a senior center, Lehigh Acres. Okay, that's 20 miles from here. Right? So you're talking probably a good 35, 45-minute drive to get there from this location. Right? So those are basically your community resources. You do have a number of food pantries in the area. You actually have more than just Gladiolas. Most of these are offered through your religious congregations. Right? So there are 16 locations. I call them locations, not pantries, because some of them are actually mobile. Right? But Harry Chapin Food Bank, who I do work with, gave me a listing of all of their food pantries for the past year. And you have 16 within 5 miles from here. But again, look at your 1 mile, right? 1 mile for what you need, none within that 1 mile area. Right? So again, right, you do have that. I'm always a little bit hesitant to bring them into the conversation, just because I've done work with the Friendship Center, and they're not looking at it from a senior center perspective necessarily, right? When we're talking about a senior center, we're largely talking about something that would be open public access, right? So same thing like with a lot of you have assisted living facilities locally here. I didn't bring them into the conversation because it's not an apples to apples comparison with what we're talking about in terms of a center. So you do have senior friendship centers. I do work with them. I think they do wonderful work. But in Naples, for example, you have senior friendship centers. The Naples Senior Center draws much more in terms of individuals. Senior friendship centers tend to have more of a health focus. So that's where we tend to get into a little bit of a difference between those entities. But it's a great point. What's that? Massive, yeah. And see, that's the problem, right? They're true senior centers. And I think that's exactly what we're trying to talk about, is the fact of true senior center. Why are we doing what we're doing, right? So, focus groups. We had planned from the very beginning of this to conduct a series of focus groups all throughout this area. We talked with a lot of individuals and said, absolutely, Dr. Felke, we'd love to have you come in and talk about this. And as usually happens, then I go and ask them and I don't get any responses back. But we were able to get a couple done here at Peace Lutheran. So I'm going to share that information with you. We held 3 sessions here. We did contact all of the local congregations to say, hey, can we host focus groups at your location? My poor research assistant, Emily, she wasn't really ready for this, to basically have to sit by the phone and not have anybody call her back. And she kept calling me, because then I was in Puerto Rico for 2 weeks with a group of students on a service trip, and she said, what am I supposed to do? And I said, well, call them back. And she would call back, and nobody would call her back. She was like, this is just, she's very energetic, and she thought, oh, well, everybody's just going to call me back, because of course they want this. Not always. So, the other problem that we have in this community is there were limited opportunities to host kind of private groups. Like a lot of times we'll go to something like a library location or something like that, and that was kind of limited in order to catch the individuals that we wanted in your community. But out of the group that we talked to here, we talked to 26 different individuals, which to be honest is not bad in terms of numbers. In the 2012 study that we did in Collier County, we talked to 20 people. So we got 6 more here than we did for that whole big Collier County study. When we did them here, the average age of our participants was about 78, heavy on the men, which for me was a surprise. Usually we are the opposite. But about 73% identified as male, 27% women. 58% were full-time residents, 42 were seasonal residents. That to me was fantastic. We had almost a 50-50 split in this regard, and I never get that. I usually get all heavy full-time residents, which is great, but we really want to hear from seasonal residents about what their needs are as well. About 46% were married, 7.8% were divorced, 46.1% were widowed. That's important. Those divorce and widow numbers become important because, again, it goes back to programming. Where do people live? 42% live in a gated community condominium, 19% not gated condo, 15% mobile RV manufactured home park. About 12% are in single-family homes not gated, 8% single-family homes gated, and 4% in an apartment. So, not a huge population living in single-family homes. So again, we're seeing individuals who are opting more for housing choices that are giving them some ability to kind of discard those daily chores like landscaping and those types of things, for example. So what were some of the strengths that people brought up? Probably the biggest thing that I heard about is there's a lot of opportunities for volunteering and involvement. Right? A lot of people said there are places to go if you want to get involved. Right? And that sounds like, well, then what do we need a senior center for? Remember, to volunteer and get involved, that's not everybody in that population. Those are the people who can go out and do that piece. Remember, go all the way back to what we talked about with our disability numbers. Ambulatory, right? Ambulatory disabilities do not allow people to get involved with these types of activities. So it's great that they're there, but a lot of the people that talked about this also talked about locations that are nowhere near here. They talked about going to places like the Barbara B. Mann Center, right? So you got to drive to get over there. They talked about getting over to the library. They talked about going to Waxahachie, right? So all of the locations that they need to go to, they need to get in the car and go someplace. Availability of restaurants, shopping, and public libraries, of course, that's what we're built on. Good weather as it allows for outdoor activities such as walking, as long as you're capable of doing those things. The geographic proximity in Southwest Florida. Right? So where we're kind of situated, we have an airport, we've got Fort Myers, we've got Bonita, Estero, and Naples. So, but again, what does this mean? You've got to get to these locations, right? So even in the strengths, there are things to consider about what people are bringing up. And then the Gladiolus Food Pantry. A lot of people kept saying, well, we have a food pantry, we have a food pantry, we have a food pantry. Actually, you have way more food pantries than just that one. So it's probably just people are not as familiar with all the other ones that are out there. Weaknesses. This is the big list. And in the actual written report, I'm going to give the big list. But this is the one where people generally jump all over. I kind of narrowed this one down to kind of the big ones. Lack of affordable housing options for older adults. Can a senior center really do anything about that? Not really. But, again, goes to programming. Helping people understand what programs are out there. What assistance might be there to help with some household options. Why is that important? Because it goes back to the statistics we saw from the Center for Neighborhood Development, right? Because now we can see they're telling us housing costs are a problem, and people are telling us housing costs are a problem. The other thing is, I always want to contextualize this as well. Affordable housing, right, has kind of an odd connotation. Most people hear affordable housing, and in my world from social work, they think Section 8. That's not what people are talking about when they're talking about affordable housing. They're talking about not having to spend 30% or more of their household income just on their housing costs, right? I've told Pastor Still and some others the story before that I was doing focus group with older adults in Estero, and I had a woman yell at me in a focus group. And she said, well, it's your fault, it's your university. You're building all these apartments for students, and they're outlandish, outrageous. And I said, nope, not us. Those are just developers that have gotten crafty and called them University Village. It sounds like us, it's not us. Believe me, I'm pretty sure President Martin would love the kind of income that's coming in from those apartments, but it's not us. Lack of communication regarding available programs and services. I was actually happy to see this, and I know I shouldn't be happy to see this, but I was happy to see it because this is something I have heard in every community I've ever spoken to older adults. They all say the same thing. I don't know how to find out what's there. Man, if there's not a reason to have a senior access center just for that purpose. And this is what I think Naples Senior Center did so well. When they got that together, what did they do? They didn't try to reinvent the wheel. They didn't try and do it all by themselves. They went right out to their community partners and they said, what can you do for us and what can we do for you? And what the Senior Center could do was host and bring the people together. And what those community partners could do was come in and present. Tell us about the SHINE program. Bring the sheriff in to talk about safety. Bring Area Agency on Aging in to talk about intakes and assessments and funding streams that are available. Then they started to progress into some of the more social aspects of things. Lack of transportation options, and that's both public and private. I thought this was interesting. It's the first time I had kind of heard the private side of this. Right? So obviously we know public transportation, it's limited. It's a mile walk if you want to go from there to here. But the private options were something where people said, I'm just not really, I know there's things like Uber and Lyft. I'm not getting into somebody else's car. And I understand that. There's actually an organization that's trying to form that's like Granny Lyft. Right, that's actually what it's called, right? They're actually looking at older adults, and they're looking at recruiting individuals that have vehicles that would be more appropriate for transporting older adults. Go figure. Older adults not being recognized as a population of need. Again, something that I hear all the time. Well, there's so much for the youth, and they're always talking about families. We always get left out of the conversation. And I get that. And I get it on both sides. Because on the one side, I look at the old age dependency ratio and I go, yeah, if I was an administrator, if I'm looking at developing my communities, we better start getting more families in here. We better start getting more working age individuals in here to help bring that number down. But that doesn't mean it should be at the expense of older adults. So I don't think the two things needs to be a choice of one versus the other. And then a lack of programs, again, specifically for older adults. So again, going back to looking at that list of resources. You don't have a lot in this community that's just for older adults. Not for the needs that they're bringing forward that they're saying are important to them. So we also asked them, well, what do you think some of the challenges are? Why do you think some of those weaknesses exist? And they said, well, there's a negative attitude towards Florida as a retirement destination, right? Unfortunately, we hear this all the time. When I moved here, people are like, oh, you're supposed to go there when you retire, not to take a job. That's where people go to die. These are the types of things we hear all the time about Florida, right? And we need to change that mindset because unfortunately, I think that mindset absolutely drives into that last two bullets there of older adults not being recognized and a lack of programs for them. because the attitude towards Florida is, they're retired. They're just going there to sit on the beach and, do that piece. The seasonal nature of Southwest Florida communities. Now, why was this brought up as a challenge? And I asked them, I said, well, why do you say that? And he said, well, it's tough. Because a lot of my really good friends are seasonal. And I hate when they leave. And I miss them when they leave. And I can't wait till they get back. That tells you something. That tells you that people are isolated. When you're sitting there saying, I live here year round, but I can't wait for my friends to come back from Minnesota, right? Then there's something to that. And we have to start addressing that. The other part of the seasonal nature is that a lot of people kind of looked at that and they said, well, we always ramp up everything. It seems like everything happens during season. And then as soon as season's over, all those programs go away. Good point. Something for us, again, to consider in terms of our programming. This is what I talk about with some of these other places. And we have things for older adults. Do you? Is it routine? Do you do it all year round? No. I know that because I pick up your flyers and I look. Older adults being seen as too old to be active, again, going back to that idea of the negative stereotype, and then again, lack of programming for these individuals. The pains of development. And this is both in the areas of traffic and social issues. I was surprised at the social issue piece. I think it was just more so because they knew I was a social worker. But, the traffic is the obvious thing. We always talk about traffic, and I'm always quick to go, I lived in New York for a while, you don't know traffic, right? So we always talk about that. But at the same time, I understand it. Traffic is problematic here, and it's getting worse. But the social issues were interesting because people said, I feel like I'm seeing more of that. I feel like I'm hearing more about it. Right? And my wife always has the joke with me when I go out and do these kind of presentations. She goes, please be nice. I really like it here. I don't want to leave. Because I usually am the one that has to go out and give the bad news, right? I give all the bad news presentations. The public relations director at FGCU is loving me right now. I've given 4 media interviews in the past 2 weeks. And he's like, you're my guy. And I'm like, yeah. Go look at the comments that are on all the stuff that I'm saying on these news things. I'm not everybody's guy, I can tell you that. But the social issues are becoming more visible. Whether it's our older adults, our homeless population, right? In Naples, where I live, that's becoming more prevalent. I just had a meeting with the director of the Lee County Homeless Coalition last week to talk about how we can get more involved. And I asked her, I said, Janet, how's it going? And she's like, you're right. I said, what do you mean? She goes, more older adults. They're losing their homes, and there's nowhere to go. Right? And that's the big thing. There's nowhere to go. That goes back to that affordable housing piece. Right? And people are like, well, it's easy. You just put them in a house. No. Ask some of your agencies locally about how that works out when you're trying to put an older adult who's 65 or older that has ambulatory issues, and the only home you can give them is a 2-bed, 3-bed, 2-bath, single-family home that's 2 stories. And unfortunately, these are the types of properties that are being unloaded on agencies. But we don't have appropriate types of housing. Generational competition. So again, that idea of older adults versus children and families, right? They are seen as being in some competition with one another in terms of programs and services. And a lack of some services due to too low of a tax structure, right? People want social services, they want other types of programs, but they aren't willing to also provide the tax base to kind of get that out, right? So an economic piece. So let's talk about my findings. So what did I actually kind of glean from everything that I took a look at? Well, you have a large number of older adults in your catchment area that could potentially utilize a senior access center. That is absolutely and abundantly clear. As I've said, you have more older adults 60 and over in the 5-mile catchment area than we had in the study back in Collier County in 2012. And if they got those kind of numbers, I can only imagine what you potentially would see here. Many of your older adults in this area are estimated to be living alone. You've got pockets of poverty. and high SNAP utilization rate literally right next door to this location. And you have a noteworthy older adult, I won't say significant, but a noteworthy older adult Spanish-speaking population in your catchment area, which would allow you to look at some potential programming in that regard. Resources. You have limited entities in your catchment area that specifically support your high population of older adults. Food pantries are the most available type of entity. You have residential and inpatient programs for some issues, such as memory care and mental health. You have no programming for social, emotional aspects of daily living. It's not here. You don't have a recreation center right in your backyard. You don't have a local community center right in your backyard where people can just go and gather. We tend to refer to those as third spaces, right? So your first space is usually your home, your second space is usually your job. What's your third space? Where do you go to be with other people from your community? Right? It could be, so absolutely, a third space could be your church, right? The problem, and I'd say problem for that, for most people, is church is kind of a one-day-a-week thing, right? So unless people are actively engaged in their congregations, right, that may not be that type of piece. And as I said, it goes to what you said, there are several religious congregations in the area through which you could be sharing information and resources. You know, you do at least have that advantage in this area. Transportation, you have a significant amount of parking out in that parking lot. Now, why do I bring that up? And it's not to say that the senior center necessarily has to be here, but I kind of looked at it from a mindset of, you know, what could it look like? You know, the Naples Senior Center, Dr. Jacqueline Pfaffer, who started that, she took my report, went to her board of directors, she handed it to them, and they read it, and somebody gave her a check anonymously for $750,000. Right? And they said, build a senior center. That's wonderful. That's what you need to get something like that going. Right? And she built that senior center in a building that she doesn't even own. The building that the Naples Senior Center is in is not a building that they own. They lease that building. But they built it and they got it in there. And the one thing she wasn't thinking about was parking. Parking is the major issue at the Naples Senior Center. So she went through all these negotiations with Collier Area Transit. We're going to deviate a line. We're going to set up paratransit. It's going to be this, that, and the other thing. Everybody drove. To the point that what did she have to do? She had to go to a local church, and she had to make an agreement with them that they could park the cars from the senior center in that parking lot. Then she had to go get a golf cart. Then she had to hire 2 valets. And you have valet parking at the Naples Senior Center out of necessity. Right? It has to happen there. Sure, yeah, so that's what I mean. You've got it here. You've got some space. You could do some things here. And I bring that up because that's the model that Golden Gate took on. Golden Gate's Senior Center took on the old library building, and there was ample parking there, and they were able to do it that way, in that location. Public transportation is available, though the walking distance, as I said, could be a little bit of a problem. Right? So there may be an advocacy effort that's needed, and maybe you could potentially engage Lee Tran in potentially deviating. Paratransit may also be an option, and this was something that that Naples Senior Center was actually able to engage in, and they were able to get some paratransit, some private paratransit done, where the van would actually go, pick people up at their homes, bring them, drop them off. So paratransit it's private transportation that literally a van would come to your house, pick you up, take you to the center, drop you off, and at the end of the day, drive you back home. Perfect example. Yeah, it's kind of a ride-share service. Okay. And that's it. So as I said, everything comes out of the Census Bureau, Center for Neighborhood Technology, Schimberg Center, Lee Tran. Questions?
When can we get started?
Yeah, I mean, here's the thing. As I've said, I've been involved with a few of these now in terms of getting it going. And I'll be honest, you have an exceptional leader in Pastor Still to get this moving. And not to get it moving, it's already moving. The fact that we are where we are now is way further than we were with anywhere else. Particularly, I'm working on another initiative, and I'll be honest, that initiative I've been on for a year, and it's not anywhere close to where this project is right now. I mean, you have identified populations, you have identified resources, you have some public transportation options locally. I mean, and what I've seen from the two presentations, this is now my third presentation I've given at Peace, and the focus groups, you've got people who are interested, right? I told another group that I'm working on in a similar thing, way far from here, it's not competition, that what you need to do is get people to rally. That's the biggest thing. People worry about, well, we have to set up a 501c3, well, we got to get a building, well, we got to get the funding. No, you need to get people. You need to get people to buy into the idea that this is a need in my community based on the facts, and rally and push the idea that this is something that's needed and wanted by your community members. And I think Pastor Still and the group here at Peace Lutheran has done an excellent job in getting that ball rolling.
Well, what about, when's your class on Wednesday, Virginia? So what about if we were, what about 11 o'clock? Is that free? What about Wednesday, August 28th at 11 a.m. for our next gathering? For all of you that are here. You're not here. Marilyn, are you here? You're. Huh. Okay. Okay. So next week is possible with you, Mary. 21st, I have lots of other issues that I can't do the 21st. The 28th. The 4th, I won't be here, but that's okay. 4th of September? You're on a cruise, so lots of, well, we're going to have to try to,
Yeah, we'll get it together.
on the 28th? Okay, so August 28th at 11 a.m. is our next meeting. Okay, Dr. Falcon, we don't want to let that go away.
Sure, absolutely.
Wednesday, August 28th at 11 a.m. We'll get together for our next meeting. We hope that all of you can come. Okay, Mary?
Two questions for you. Sure. One, as we were talking about the building over here, has anybody already started looking at that, where the old Big Lots building used to be and there's an empty restaurant and all that? And two, does the bus go by there?
So I don't know anything about buildings. I'm not sure if that level of engagement, that's generally not my piece. That's more for like an implementation group. I just come in and kind of say whether it's a good idea or not, and I think it's a really good idea. I think this location is a good idea. So I think any opportunity to potentially look at property in this area is a good idea. Look, the original study that I did in Naples in 2012, that was what I was actually supposed to do. I was supposed to say, show us 3 or 4 locations in Collier County where a senior center might be a good idea. And I said, Jewish Family and Community Services, if there's a property, you've got a ton right in your backyard. And then I gave them 3 other locations, one of which eventually ended up being the Golden Gate Senior Center location. Right? So that, I think, is the next piece of this. Now it's, if everybody thinks it's a good idea and we're going to push and we're going to advocate and we're going to try and get elected officials on board to help us with this effort because that's necessary, then I think that's your next step. It's to start look at what's available, what's it going to cost. I know that there have been some conversations with Dr. Pfaffer at the Naples Senior Center. I believe you also visited the Golden Gate Senior Center. Okay, so just, but I think that's important, is starting to get that together. The fact that we have organizations in the room who could potentially support an effort like this, I think is important. Area Agency on Aging is critical to something like this. It truly is, because they were a big supporter of this effort back, when the Collier centers were started. I will also tell you that now is a good time for that. I don't know if people are familiar or know about this. The Department of Health has founded an aging coalition. locally here. And I think a couple people may be sitting in on those meetings. I've started attending those meetings because I know some of the organizers from another project. This is the right time for this. It's the right time. You're going to have your seasonal people coming back in. Now's your time to rally, get a concept paper together, and start making a push. And I think you're in a very good position here to do that.
Oh, and just the transit.
Oh,
does
the
it go by
transportation. I can look at that because I don't know exactly the location where it is. I can tell you that transportation does not come down McGregor. It doesn't, no. So it comes around that kind of Kelly Drive area, which is the 1 mile about that way. So, yes, it goes out that way. Yeah. Right. So we'd have to take a look and see exactly where that deviates.
Other thoughts or questions? Marilyn?
When we're rallying these people, what are our priorities? Where do we start? Funding programs?
Yeah, I think what you do is funding is the ask, right? So that's the thing that you're going to kind of end the conversation with. I think what we need to do, and I throw myself into this because as soon as I do this stuff, I feel myself getting involved, and I do. I'm invested in these because I think they're important. I think what we need to do is, as I said, develop a concept paper. And I think part of that needs to be some of what I have here in the presentation. We don't want to give people big reports saying, here, read this, and this is why we need this. I think we take the most salient points of what we found, we put it together and say, this is why we need it, this is what it can look like, and this is what we're asking for you. And for a lot of individuals in your community to participate in this venture. So I think that becomes a big part of it as well. There's going to be, when you're talking about people, as I said, I even in the strengths, I find things that go, ooh, that fits, right? Because even though it's strong, we can still use it. So when people are saying, oh, there's a ton of opportunities for volunteering and involvement, I'm very happy to know that you have a bunch of people in this community that want to volunteer and be involved. Because we want those people to come right into the senior center and do exactly that. Right? We want to have people who can help serve those congregate meals, maybe who can lead some of these sessions, maybe who can facilitate some of these discussions, right? And then Pastor Still and I have started a conversation about partnership, right? How can my department, how can the Department of Social Work at FGCU come in and help? Can we get a student who can come in and assist with this, whether it's the implementation or when we get further down the line, getting you somebody in here who can help to manage those programs, and the good news is we have some models for this. And, the Golden Gate Senior Center and Naples Senior Center are very different models of how to do things. The Lehigh Acres Senior Center is a very different model on how those things work. But I think what's important is you have models to draw from, and from that you can say what works best here. Right? I always go back to cave expertum, beware the expert, right? You get people that come in and say, this is how you have to do things. No. I used to work in Armenia, and they used to say, people come in here and tell us how to do social services. We smile politely, we nod our heads, and when they leave, we take the pieces out of the binder that don't work for us, and we throw it in the trash, and then we keep the rest, and we put it with all the other countries that told us how to do things. That's what I think you have here. You have models that you can pick and choose from to get what's best for this community, because all of them are different.
One of the things when Meryl and I went to visit the Naples Senior Center that so impressed us was the fact that with the activities are very similar to what is happening here already in terms of the wonderful ministry that Meryl and all of you have developed. But there were a team of 6 social workers on their staff for their 1,000+ people who help them. Even though they're all pretty healthy and active people, we go through times of crises in our life, and so that place becomes a tremendous resource center to help people navigate the issues of life. I was very impressed with that fact.
Absolutely, and I think that's where a department like ours could potentially
Yes.
step in and help with some of those case management wraparound services.
Right. Other thoughts or questions? Mary?
I was very privileged to partner with FGCU and the OT department this year, and we had 3 classes come in and do research. They worked with the caregivers where I work with, and they did all kinds of stuff, did home assessments, all that kind of stuff. And I was so proud that the students really learned about the senior needs, and this is their future careers. We're going to be on their shoulders in the future. They're our caregivers. They're the ones that are going to be dealing with this in the future. And the thirst they had for knowledge, they were so excited. So I think if we can get your students involved in this, they were excellent all the way around. And so I think what a wonderful thing that would be.
Yeah, and again, I think this is a perfect time for that. Just like we have a learning coalition started. Yesterday we had a meeting. We had our college retreat because I'm in the college with occupational therapy. And Dr. Martin was there, and one of the things he said was, I think we need to put a bigger focus on gerontology. So in social work, we're looking at developing a certificate in gerontological social work, right? So that we can train our social work better on the needs of older adults. Dr. Martin wants to see a bigger focus on gerontology in terms of occupational therapy, physical therapy, exercise science, those types of things. We've also worked with Senator Benaquisto and a few other local elected officials because the other piece that they want to look at is healthcare management related to older adults. Right? And so a few of our students have had the opportunity to tour places like Shell Point and meet with the CEOs and the program directors and those types of things to start looking at what a career in that area might look like. And we have several of our students who are doing that now.
Yes, you said there are several religious congregations within this 5-mile radius.
Yes.
How successful have you been? Because Peace Lutheran obviously has been leading the pack.
Right.
How successful have you been in involving their pastors, their ministers, and their congregations?
So we talked to them when we came here and we did the initial presentation of results. Pastor Still had invited a number of the other religious leaders, and I spoke with them and I said, this is what we're looking to do. And they said, absolutely, we're interested. We'd love to get involved. And then when we called and said, can we come in and do focus groups? We didn't get a response.
Now, we do have somebody from St. Columkill here today. Is there anyone else I want to, and you're
Yes.
from St. Columkill?
Okay.
So they're very supportive
Yeah.
of us.
Yeah, and it's not to say that people wouldn't be supportive. I think it's a different ask when we're coming in to say, can we come into your building and bring people from the outside in to talk about these issues? Doing those things, it's not always easy, and a lot of people just don't like to have that type of contact in their organizations. I understand that. I try not to do that. That's why we try to do things at libraries and so forth. Unfortunately, in this community, it just wasn't a great option for us.
You have to tell Emily the trick of it is to take the pastor out to lunch.
Right, well, that's usually the thing, right? Feed them and they will come. Right, yeah. So we try that, but, that's...
Well,
that
here's
tends to be a big piece.
Pastor Johanna, who works with our counseling center here at Peace.
Just a comment on what, the conversation you're having over at, WGCU is also to include an emphasis or a piece that really deals with, the mental health issues of older adults. I mean, mental health in Southwest Florida is sorely lacking, but it seems like geriatric mental health care is also really sorely lacking, and with the population numbers, it sounds like that would be a really important piece.
Yeah.
And just for funds, I have a good friend of mine that works over at McLean in the geriatric psych program. And I said, well, how old do you need to be there to go into that program? She goes, well, 50. And I was like, 50?
Yeah.
I was like 56 at the time. So anyway, it's an important piece because it's different.
Yeah, and again, as I said, talking about the right time, right? So FGCU, probably a lot of people have kind of heard in the news that we're starting this campus community counseling clinic. Fantastic. As long as you can get from here to FGCU, you'll be great, right? So I agree with you, right? We have these wonderful ideas sometimes, and look, I'm not trying to knock my own college here, but I sit there and go, I have a hard time finding parking on campus. Like, I'm going to go back now, and I'm going to end up parking on the other side of campus to walk back to my building just because I know how our campus works. Campus community clinic, it's going to be great for students, right? I don't see a lot of people maybe coming with their boats across the lake from Miramar Lakes, I just don't see that happening. So you're right. That's why we need this, right? So when we're sitting here saying, why are we doing what we're doing, right? Mental health, I wish we had better statistics on it, right? We don't collect data in the Census Bureau that says, do you suffer from a mental health disorder, right? And here's the thing. I'm also of the mindset, look, social workers are the largest providers of mental health services in the country, right? A lot of people don't know that about what social workers do. And I'm of the mindset, we've been talking to our students this week, and we've been saying a lot of you are going to go off and be clinicians. You should all start in therapy yourselves. Go. Know what it's like to be a client. Know what the experience is that they're going to go through. Because we all have our things, right? It's that idea, one bad day. That can be the turning point for people. So it's not that people have diagnosed mental health disorders and that's why we need this. You know, unfortunately, we've gotten into this mindset of calling people the worried well. Well, everybody has these things. And they shouldn't be disregarded just because of the level of income that they have or the level of education that they have or whether they're male, because we tend to get that a lot. Be a man, suck it up. Right? I'm not a big proponent of those things. I agree with you. We need to put a better emphasis on these things, and we need to do them directly in the community where people can access them, 100%.
Other questions? Mary, you have something to say?
Over the past 5 years, and you all have been wonderful, I've been working on the dementia-friendly house of worship thing, right? And it's been the same thing. You go and you give presentations, you have a luncheon, you do all these mailers, you call people, and only a handful of people will show up. The clergy, it's for the clergy, will show up for the programs to learn about how churches can work with folks who have memory impairment and help with caregivers. And so a young lady over in Cape Coral said, I want to help you. I know I can get 50 churches here, blah, blah, blah. She's been working on this for the past couple of months, and she said, every time I walk in the door, they take the flyer and go, thank you, and drop it in the trash, or they don't want to speak, or what do you want? What are you trying to sell? So I think there's a fear. Right. I think it's really based on lack of education and fear that a lot of people go, number one, what are you trying to sell? Number two, what are we going to have to do that's going to be more work for us? And number three, what's the stigma attached to whatever you're trying to do? And I think through the community, all of us together, planting those seeds and speaking about the needs for a senior center and what that can do will help take away that stigma and fear. It takes a long time sometimes, though, to really get that to happen, but we're growing. It is growing, so.
Yeah, and that's where I think, again, I think you have two things there. One is we have a tendency to go into communities and tell people what they need. This is what you have to do. Right. And people, no, ask them, what do you need? What do you want? Right? I think that's the more important thing. Yeah. Then I think the secondary thing is you're absolutely right when you start talking about building trust. That's where your partners, your potential community partners come into play. Because maybe they're not members of Peace Lutheran's congregation. But if we can get some of the other congregations on board and we get their pastors to say, we believe in this and we think this is a good effort and we are supporting this, now maybe we're going to start to see some draw. I think any of these things always need to be community collaborations. You know, it's what I started off with in my career was working at Catholic Charities on a community early childhood education program. We ran the preschool, but we brought in the Department of Health. We brought in the library. We brought in the Child Guidance Center, right? We had everybody else from the outside. No one is an expert in all of this stuff. So the more we can draw on those community resources, bring the people in that have the information, not reinvent the wheel, the better it's going to be for all of us.
We have one more thought?
I have one more. Waxahachie, and I have taken classes there. It seems like when you mention the generational, it seems that, first of all, they don't have enough room to have the classes. Right. Secondly, it's aimed at youth. Right. And thirdly, it's unaffordable for the seniors. Mm-hmm. So, I mean, I know they're an asset here, but I see those as, for a senior, 3 negatives.
Yeah, and I think you're absolutely right. I don't think that's something that I have not heard in other locations that we do need to be considering. You know, when we're looking at all this cost already, the purpose of a senior center is not to add more cost to an individual. That, again, is why I think those community partnerships are so essential, so that we can get community partners who do this. That's the job of some of these individuals, is educational outreach, right? They are happy to come in and deliver their message and talk about their programs, because that's what they're designed to do. And I think too often, again, we get into this mindset of, well, if we're not paying for it, it's not quality. That's not true. You know, we have to go to the people who know these programs, who know these issues, get them in the doors and talking to our people so that they have the best available information.
Sherry?
Exactly. Yeah.
So I won't be here for the next meeting, but we will ensure that someone from the agency is. At this point, I know that we can help with the rallying through our website, our social media, our newsletter that goes out, even the elder helpline when they talk to clients. So at the next meeting, will any of that be addressed? Like what message we can post and share? And even through our community outreach committee, we can, get out in the community and start.
Yeah, I think your next step might be a speaking tour. I mean, I think that's
Swinging door?
Yeah, I think a speaking tour is probably your next thing. Starting to get in with some of the people locally who could support this type of an effort. Whether you're talking to, local elected officials are going to be a little difficult because we're in an election year and they're going to have a different priority and focus. However, could be a great time to actually get in front of them. They're going to be starting their legislative session early this year. They're going to be starting in January, so getting to them now is actually a really good time to get to them. I know I teach social policy. I'm already gearing my students up to go out and start talking to their local officials. And then we actually take them to Tallahassee as well. So, for me, I'm sitting here going, hey, this could be a great rallying piece for my students to even carry as we're doing some of our advocacy work, because all of my students must talk to a local official. Like I said, I think this is a great time. I think you have a lot of really good things that are coming together at the right time in Lee County that could be really beneficial to an effort like this. Yep. I sit on that. I just haven't been in a meeting.
Okay,
so,
all right.
Yeah.
So, and of course, we have a direct line to the Department of Elder Affairs there, so that would be a really great way to get them involved.
Yeah.
At least get the information flowing up to them and saying, this is what we're going to do and we're going to try to do. So, and of course, yeah, like you said, the Dubin Center will be glad to help. And
Yeah. Casey, who chairs that
Yeah.
committee, she's one of my two-time students.
I
She's a
love
bachelor's
Casey.
and a master's out of our program. Yeah.
She's wonderful.
Yeah, she's great.
And please bring yourselves and anyone else you think should come to help us get this door open. And Maryland already, and Virginia and other programs I know are already on the docket. They're already happening. So there's stuff happening here that we can begin engaging people. We're very thankful. So thank you, Dr. Felke.
Thank you all very much.
Go
I appreciate
Eagles.
it. Thank you.